Welcome in. Happy Tuesday to you. Today we're diving into the stories the mainstream won't touch, as usual. Today we're joined by Dane Wigington, lead researcher at Geoengineering Watch, to unpack the catastrophic Texas floods that have claimed over 100 lives and left communities in ruins. Is this just Mother Nature? Or could weather manipulation be fueling these biblical deluges along with the surge in extreme weather and raging wildfires? Buckle up, we're digging for the truth with Dane, and this one you won't want to miss. So it's the news you need to know, but with solutions and hope. This is Get Free with Christy Lee. First, we're going to take a quick clip from Ted Cruz talking about what happened in Texas. Let's watch.
To the best of my knowledge, there is zero evidence of anything related to anything like weather modification. And look, the internet can be a strange place. People can come up with all sorts of crazy theories. What I know is a reality is that a whole lot of Texans are grieving right now. I will tell you, I was visiting with one parent who was talking about online being harassed online because their information was public that they had a little girl who was missing at Mystic. And look, there are a lot of people who are messed up and
So Ted Cruz is saying, let's argue about what could have caused this catastrophic event later on, and let's focus on the grieving. Yes, absolutely, we should focus and be compassionate, but that should spur us into finding out what truly happened even more. So he's downplaying weather manipulation there. So it's settled. There's nothing to see here. It's just natural, catastrophic, biblical, deadly flooding in Texas. Here to discuss is Dane Wigington. He's the lead researcher and administrator for the website GEOENGINEERINGWatch.org. Make sure you bookmark that, GEOENGINEERINGWatch.org. And he's the executive producer for the groundbreaking climate engineering documentary, The Dimming. He has a background in solar energy, was a former employee of Bechtel Power Corporation and a licensed contractor in California and Arizona. He's devoted his last 20 years of life to constant research on the issue of covert global climate engineering operations and the effort to expose and halt them. So Dane Wigington, thank you so much for your service, for being so passionate about this topic. Been wanting to speak to you for a long time. Glad we were able to make it work now. And we're going to dive into as much as we can fit into this next hour. But first, I wanted to get your reactions to Ted Cruz's comments, essentially trying to debunk that weather manipulation had anything to do with what we had to endure here in Texas.
First, thank you for your attention to this issue, Christy. Very grateful. We need voices like yours in this battle. About Mr. Cruz, he's either criminally ignorant of the climate engineering scenario or he's lying. Take your pick. We have everyone like Ted Cruz within the system whose job it is to protect the system. Climate engineering and weather modification are a matter of historical record going back almost a century. So for him to pretend that this is some, quote, crazy conspiracy theory, it's simply the same behavior we have from everybody within the system. And when they resort to that term of conspiracy theory, that's the final fallback of the factless and the fearful, or they're blatantly lying. That's exactly what Cruz is doing. Climate engineering is inseparable from what happened in Texas, absolutely inseparable. The entire system has been derailed, and we have specific programs in that specific region that we recorded in real time occurring with this event. The frequency transmission manipulation of that precipitation that they are manipulating off the record-warm Gulf of Mexico. So again, what we're asking people to do is to investigate for themselves, not to believe us and certainly not to believe Ted Cruz, whose job it is apparently to lie. Investigate for yourselves. This is historical record. GeoEngineeringWatch.org has taken a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration flying lab to altitude, top scientists in it, and we have sampled what heavy aircraft were emitting, processed that at one of the world's most renowned testing labs, Rensselaer Polytechnic in New York, found exactly what we knew we would find, starting with climate engineering elements of aluminum. So again, bottom line is this is all historical record. These programs are well documented at our site. We have Senate documents, government documents, volumes of data, absolute volumes going back decades. Mr. Cruz doesn't have a clue.
Absolutely. And I love how strongly you said that. I know that Steve Bannon tore into that as well and pointed out that Ted Cruz was also behind trying to implement essentially the acceleration of AI into that big, beautiful bill. But that's a whole another topic. I really want to talk to you about evidence you've gathered and some of the things that have been spinning around on the social media atmosphere about what happened in Texas. But for those who don't know a lot about you, I am fascinated how you got into this very, very specialized field. I mean, you are the lead researcher when it comes to geoengineering. It's a topic that has, of course, brought about a lot of people saying, "Oh, this is just conspiracy theory nonsense," which no, it's not. But how would someone like yourself? I know you have a background in solar energy. How would you get so specialized into and passionate about this topic, digging into it?
Well, first, this is a matter of priorities. If we don't deal with this issue, this specific issue, what's happening in our skies, which is weather, chemical, and biological warfare, we are breathing what they are spraying. Aluminum is toxic to all life forms, period, no exceptions. Every person we've tested at GeoEngineering hair, blood, urine, packed with these toxic heavy metals, again, starting with aluminum. Is it any wonder Alzheimer's, dementia, ALS is going off the charts? And this goes right down the web of life, Christy, again, from insects, soil microbiome. So when I moved to the Pacific Northwest or to Northern California, expecting to find clean air, off-grid home, was the cover of the world's largest renewable energy magazine. And I began losing 60, 70% of my solar power uptake from whatever these aircraft were emitting. I knew that couldn't be, quote, condensation. And I was surprised I wouldn't have heard of these programs given my background. So I began to research, found mountains of data on climate engineering, geoengineering, looked at the primary elements used in these operations, began to test my rain, my precipitation. I had hoped I would not find these elements there, but I did, again, starting with aluminum. The more I tested, the higher the levels went until I had a single rain test with 3,450 ppb, parts per billion of aluminum. That's toxic rain. What was I to do but to face this issue? If everything in my world was being systematically contaminated and I have nowhere to hide, there is nowhere to hide, what was one to do? I've faced or dedicated the last 20 plus years to this battle because of that. And we've had now a great many are waking up. Your voice is helpful for that end. But if there's nowhere for us to hide, if we can't breathe without sucking in these toxic heavy metals, and they're not just toxic in and of themselves, but as you combine these metals, they become even more toxic. It's destroying the ozone layer, disrupting the hydrological cycles we just saw in Texas. Is this not an immediate fight for life? If we don't fix this, all other causes, all other concerns will soon be moot. It's a matter of priorities, Christy. We have to deal with this or nothing else will matter.
Now, you mentioned that the word is getting out. And, you know, for those that call it conspiracy, it's getting almost laughable because there is more acceptance on this. You can actually Google now and find some information. I find that AI systems like even Grok and ChatGPT will minimize or kind of poke fun at any inference of weather manipulation. But the thing is the truth is out there. And so much so that right away, people were not buying the narrative that, oh, goodness, you know, we're just having these sudden onslaught of extreme weather events, you know, for no reason. To the point that, you know, you were seeing littered throughout X in particular, posts like I have a few to show, but there's a post that says Texas rain enhancement weather modification projects directly over flooded areas near Kerr County. You know, you have the someone else talking about the correlation between funding by Peter Thiel connected to Palantir and Augustus DeRico, the 25-year-old tech bro who founded Rainmaker. He's now coming out saying, like, yes, and admitting that they did do some cloud seeding just 2 days before the historic flooding. But, you know, the areas we hit, they dissipated just shortly after. It had nothing to do with this. So what can you tell me on those elements? Is that a major cause? Were there other things at play?
These are important points you bring up. And now at this point, the climate engineers and the controllers may be, again, using the localized cloud seeding operations as a smokescreen to mask what they're doing. So to compare the two, localized cloud seeding operations compared to climate engineering is comparing an ant to an elephant. And they have historically used the localized cloud seeding operations as cover for what they're doing on a scale that's inconceivably larger. So might they be throwing this Augustus Dorico under the bus at this point, or trying to make him bear the blame? It's difficult to say, but even in his case, we have photographs of that individual nuzzled up to Bill Clinton. What's he doing in those circles at 25 years old with this kind of an operation? And why would he show up? He showed up at almost every single state hearing for state legislation to pass bills banning climate engineering. He showed up there to try to debunk this issue. Why would he be so invested in that? What part is he actually playing in this whole scenario of trying to deny this elephant in our sky of climate engineering? So the bottom line is, what we see in our skies, let me break this down to the most fundamental part. Condensation or sprayed dispersion. We have up-close film footage of these aircraft at altitude with retrofit nozzles on the wing pylons aimed into the exhaust jet stream to make this look like condensation turning on and off. End of debate. This is not condensation, period. And when you see, people's sense of reason should tell them that. When you see an aircraft leaving a trail across the horizon and it suddenly shuts off and it continues across the sky, it doesn't fall out of the sky, his engines didn't die, obviously it's not condensation. And when we have the so-called meteorological community telling us, well, the atmospheric layers are different, the atmosphere layers horizontally, not vertically. You don't pass through a wall of vertical different atmospheric conditions. These are sprayed dispersions. Again, there's no debate here other than people who simply don't want to know the truth. The bottom line is we have the entire global climate science community openly, aggressively discussing that their objective of putting aircraft in the sky for solar radiation management. Support me use the science terms, by the way. The chemtrails term is fine for personal conversations, but nothing else. It's the instant marginalization term for any official agency, any matrix media. So when we have the whole global climate science community, again, describing exactly what we see in our skies, their goal of wanting to put aircraft in the skies to spray light scattering particles, that's what happened by solar power, and to block the sun, to slow down the thermal energy buildup, to slow down the warming of the planet, with no consideration of the consequences, apparently. And yet they deny what we see, which is exactly what they described: skies that look like something from a science fiction movie, dirty, filthy white, destruction of the ozone layer. That's why the sun feels so intense on our skin. And yet they pretend that what we're seeing isn't really what we're seeing. And the lie is ludicrous at this point. And the American population needs to stop just going about their business pretending their lives are going to continue as they are, because they're not. This is destroying what's left of the planet's life support systems. This is an immediate existential threat, Christy.
When you said that, it just popped in my head. You know, I've also seen people talking about, man, I really don't see insects or lightning bugs or bees or as much as I used to. Is that correlated?
It's directly related. It's the single biggest causal factor. And when I say that, I'm not denying that we've been horrible stewards of the planet. Horrible. Where would I start? And again, so it's, for many people, they've been trained to think it's either this or it's that. You're either on the red team or the blue team. No, it's much more complicated. Every form of human activity that's damaging to the planet is a problem. But this particular problem is the biggest of all, and that's saying a lot. So the insects are an incredibly important subject to bring up. Thank you for doing so. GeoEngineeringWatch.org was the first significant source to publish in 2012, because of our work with former government scientists, that insect populations were collapsing. And the so-called science community tried to marginalize us then to hide the issue. Now they've had to admit it because they can't hide it anymore. So we've lost right now today 80 to 90% of global insect populations, terrestrial and aquatic. Bee populations, Christy, you've heard the bees are collapsing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they just published in the last few weeks that this year, some 70% of the bee populations collapsed. That sounds bad. It is bad. But what's the real story? That was 70% of the 20% that remained, which means we're down to single-digit populations, single-digit percentages of bee populations left. What did Einstein say? No bees, no people within a few years. That's exactly what he said. And we're losing insects across the board, and also plankton. Plankton are down 90% in the Atlantic right now. 90%. That's the single biggest source of oxygen production on the planet. So how's climate engineering related? Climate engineering is destroying the ozone layer. The oxidative particles and the frequency transmissions that are used to manipulate them are destroying the ozone layer. Without the ozone layer, we won't be here. We're down to approximately, based on our metering, our measuring, from a former NASA contract engineer, he was probably the most qualified in the world. He recently passed away, but with equipment we supplied him, metering UV radiation on the surface, we're getting UVC on the surface. That is a very damaging spectrum of UV radiation. It's indicative of an ozone layer that's about to collapse. We're down to 30% of the ozone layer remaining. Not 30% gone, 30% remaining. This should be absolute headline news everywhere, every day, while they're filling us with smoke and mirrors of everything else. And we have, between the collapsing ozone layer killing the insects, the toxic rain killing the insects, the toxic rain killing soil microbiome, which is killing tree roots. Christy, have you seen every time the wind blows, trees are tipping over everywhere, uprooting and tipping over? See it all the time now. And that's because the root systems are dying off, just like their crowns are dying off. And so many people don't seem to notice. They think, well, we still have Walmart, we still have McDonald's and Big Macs, so what could be wrong, right? No environment, no people. Very simple.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's so much more serious than we give it credit for. I mean, we don't talk about this enough, and it takes these catastrophic events to revisit this topic, unfortunately. But it's not just the immediate loss of life that we're seeing with the flooding that happened, but the systemic loss of life. And it's ironic because the very people that say that claim that they care about the environment seem to be the very people that are actually the ones destroying it in the name of supposedly saving the climate. But I want to get back to that in a moment, because I want to I want to hear your theory on what you think contributed to this most recent flooding, because we've seen a lot of disasters, and I guess we'll try and go through other situations. But for this most recent flooding event, what's your theory on how we saw this happen on such a mass scale, and how the predictions were so wrong?
Well, we recorded it, so we're not theorizing. We recorded the frequency transmissions that kept that moisture corralled in one spot. These are patented technologies. We're not guessing. And your listeners can go to geoengineeringwatch.org and look at what we just posted, a 90-second alert on the Texas scenario. And we recorded the frequency transmissions that kept that moisture in place and made sure it fell in one place. It's under that recent column right there near the top. A little higher up, I think. They're on the right column there. It's on the recent column on the right, and you'll see it near the top. There's a 90-second video right there, very top. So orchestrating biblical floods. And again, within that, the YouTube that's there, you can see the frequency transmissions that are also used, by the way, to hold hurricanes in place. Christy, do you remember Hurricane Harvey? That they knew you'd have to click the YouTube and you can see the frequency transmissions that will come on and it will show that. But you remember Hurricane Harvey, perhaps, that sat in place for 3 days and dumped 50 inches of rain on Texas? How did they know that was going to happen 7 days in advance? It's the same process that was just used in Texas. Again, it's the NexRad network of frequency transmitters that we're told are just weather monitoring radars. That's a blatant, glaring lie. Those transmissions are used to repel the storm moisture. They have a repelling effect, and they can maneuver the storm with that. And your listeners can search geoengineeringwatch.org hurricanes, and they can see we captured that with Hurricane Harvey as well. It'll come on here in a moment. We captured the frequency transmissions that held that moisture in place. I'm very surprised we still have access to these loops, and I hope that doesn't change. You see that cells a ball of moisture sitting in one spot there, as you see clearly from the vapor loop radar. You'll see the transmissions come on in a moment. This is Project Popeye. U.S. so successful at controlling rain in Vietnam, 60 years ago that they had to pass international treaties forbidding this type of operation. Yet Ted Cruz tells us it's a conspiracy theory. Ted Cruz has no clue on the truth. There's the frequency transmissions. There's the ball of moisture and the other bright spherical shapes around it that held it in place. Now it's nearing its end and breaking apart. But as it comes into place there, those frequency transmissions, right, coming up there, hold it in place so that moisture is consolidated. There, you can see the blue light up transmissions. That's what that is. Kept that moisture in place right there. And again, these are patented technologies. And if they search geoengineeringwatch.org hurricanes, they can see this on a much clearer scale. In the case of Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Helene, for example, that was directed into South Carolina. We're dealing with legislators there. They know this is going on. So the American public, bottom line, Christy, asleep at the wheel and believing clueless, deceptive tools for the power structure like Ted Cruz. Time to wake up. This is weather warfare against the U.S. population. And that INMOD treaty that was shown in that video, the Environmental Modification Treaty that was passed internationally after the U.S. was so successful at controlling uranium in Vietnam 60 years ago, as if they can't do it 100 times more efficiently now. In that treaty, it did not forbid governments from conducting these operations over their own populations. Imagine that. So for those who think that our government, I don't care what the political stripe is, for those who think those who truly control our government are here to help us, time to wake up.
But obviously the glimmering question then becomes, Dane, what could possibly be the motivation? That's why I think it's so hard to get people to wake up, is because they cannot imagine a scenario where people just want to, other people that are supposed to be watching out for our welfare want to kill mass amounts of people, that they would want to do it in such a brutal way. So what is the motivation? Why would they target this area of Texas? Any thoughts there?
Again, time to wake up. For those who don't know what happened with COVID, and that it was the gain of function characteristic was engineered and published in journal Nature in 2015, that they engineered the gain of function characteristic. Why? And for the medical treatment that was forced on everyone after that, for those who think that the power structure is here to help them, they're living in a delusion. Let's look at former U.S. presidential advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski, advised U.S. presidents from Johnson, and we know what a nefarious character Lyndon Johnson was, involved with the JFK assassination and who knows how much else, Vietnam, everything else. But from Johnson to 2017, Zbigniew Brzezinski, your listeners can look this up. It's easy to find online. Direct quote from this U.S. presidential advisor. With today's technology, it's far easier to kill 1 million people than to control them. We have the global controllers stating on the record their goal of reducing global populations down to 500 million. That's a big drop since we're over 8 billion right now. Why would we think they're here to help? Again, we have fluoride being dumped in our water. If anybody hasn't seen how they do that in municipalities, they're wearing a hazmat suit to dump fluoride in our water. Obviously, that's not helping us. And when they put adjuvants in medical injections of aluminum and mercury, let's stop and think about that one for just a moment. Aluminum and mercury in an injection that we're told is, quote, safe and effective. Both of those elements are neurotoxins. They're both highly toxic. When you combine them, we have peer-reviewed study to prove this. I'm not guessing. When you combine those two elements, mercury and aluminum, the toxicity can increase as much as 10,000%. That's peer-reviewed study. That's 100 times worse. Are they really here to help us? Bottom line is the public is a rapidly increasing liability to those in power, especially the U.S. population, many of which are heavily armed. So again, it's time to shatter the illusion that those in power are here to help. They're not. And there are many other objectives along the way too, Christy. For example, in South Carolina, that area that was scoured out by the manipulated flooding of Hurricane Helene, there's lithium deposits there that the public was not allowing access to. Fixed that problem, didn't it? Let's look at Dubai. A year and a half ago, when Dubai suggested they were going to ditch the dollar, the US dollar, what happened in Dubai? Within days, Dubai was buried with 2 years worth of rain in 6 hours. Within days. Wow. Just a coincidence? Really? we took satellite imagery of the day before and the day of in Dubai, and climate engineering operations and frequency transmission manipulation were clearly visible in the Persian Gulf the day before and the day of. This is covert weather warfare. This is the crown jewel weapon of the controllers, because it's a weapon with which they can decimate populations without those populations ever even knowing they're under assault, and they can blame nature.
Unbelievable. So let's talk about some of our leaders. You know, we have someone like Ted Cruz, who is just like, oh, this is silly. It's just conspiracy theory. But then you have someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and she's out there saying she wants to make deadly weather manipulation a felony. She put out a tweet that she's introducing a bill that prohibits the injection, release, or dispersion of chemicals or substances in the atmosphere for the express purpose of altering weather, temperature, climate, or sunlight intensity. It will be a felony offense. She says that you know, she's kind of modeling off what they did in Florida. But then you take a look at the comments, and then again you see people saying this is a bunch of phony bull. There's loopholes that would still allow, even when they do this, that essentially still allow the government to, who you're saying is at fault for actually doing this. So basically, is this legislation, these bills, doing anything if there's loopholes for our government, who is the ones probably at fault for doing these kinds of things, to do them anyway? I mean, thoughts on that?
Great points, Christy. You're bringing up great points, and these are very important points. First, we're very grateful to Marjorie for her bringing this forward. Her description was very on track and accurate, and it does matter. The state legislation does matter because it's putting this issue on the radar, and it's not enforceable. These are DoD operations that are considered a matter of, quote, national security. And as far as national security goes, that's not about protecting U.S. citizens. That's about protecting those in power and making sure no one can challenge that power. That's what it's about. So although it's not enforceable, although it's just symbolic, it's still important. It still matters. And about those kinds of content or comments or other comments, again, from people who sincerely are trying to convince themselves that this can't be happening because the existential threat it poses is simply too threatening to their paradigm of reality. And we have primitive psychological defense mechanisms. This is very well documented with psychoanalysis. The vast majority have these mental firewalls that when you pose an existential threat to them like this, they simply shut down. It just can't be. I have double PhD academician colleagues that have stated this to me. It can't be that bad because it just can't be that bad. What kind of a basis is that for a conclusion? Just because you can't face it, it can't be that bad? Guess what? It is that bad. It's worse than that bad. And this is another factor here that's very important. The power structure has very successfully divided the population on this issue. So the environmentally conscious left or that segment of society has been taught and trained, and unfortunately this is true in too many cases. We're trying to change that. And anybody who mentions climate engineering or geoengineering is denying all the other sources of damage to the planet. Well, that's not true. In our case, we fully acknowledge that. But we're saying, how can we have any legitimate discussion of climate, anything, from any perspective, without first and foremost addressing this elephant in the equation? And that's something all of us should agree on, because we do have too many on the other side of the fence that are trying to convince themselves that the only thing wrong with the climate is climate engineering, and that's patently false as well. Does the climate know the difference between a particle from a smokestack or an exhaust pipe or a geoengineering jet? It doesn't know the difference. It's all a part of the problem. But this intentional intervention is the worst of all by far. And if we can build that bridge from both sides to say, how can we discuss the climate legitimately without addressing this first, we may be able to build an army and push this issue, metaphorically, again, an army, to light. If we could expose this, if we can fully push this out in the open, Christy, we will cause a shockwave around the world. That will be the proverbial pitchforks and torches moment, and we need to reach that moment.
Absolutely. And I think that this is a good time to remind our viewers that it's only because we have outlets like LindellTV.com that we can talk about this. I mean, I'm definitely used to being pushed off of Facebook, pushed off of YouTube. It looks like YouTube might be, I mean, even you said you were able to post something on YouTube. So maybe they're loosening the reins there. But really, we rely on outlets like this to get the truth out there and to get people talking and to create that army that you're talking about. So let me just take a break for a moment and tell our viewers, remind them that please support Mike Lindell and his efforts to get the word out. We are not only on LindellTV.com, but also on Rumble, on X, and so many other places trying to grow, to get the word out of these important topics. And you can support him one way by, of course, going to mypillow.com/KL. That's mypillow.com KL. And there are, of course, always sales going on. I encourage you to use promo code KL to get your big discount. That really helps me personally continue to fund my work. I'm doing as much work as I possibly can with 2 little ones and 3 teens. But I'm so appreciative to LindellTV.com for giving me an outlet to speak and have these amazing interviews with some of the smartest people I would never have the chance to talk to otherwise. So support the work that we're doing here by going to mypillow.com. Use promo code KL. You can see so many of the different offerings there. Perhaps you already have pillows. Well, then maybe get some towels. Or have you tried the Rev 7 energy drink? That is a healthier alternative than your typical energy drinks. Because I have teens in the home, I know how they like their energy drinks. But Rev 7 is something that is not powered by caffeine, but is powered by healthy alternatives. So, and it tastes great. So it's powered by Go BHB, no caffeine, no sugar, and it can fuel your mind and body for a healthier tomorrow. So much that Mike Lindell is offering. He just went through that crazy trial where they accused him of defamation, and anybody that tells the truth, anybody that stands up for truth is heavily persecuted. And so he needs to fund that defense and keep this on the air so we can continue to talk to people like Dane Wigington, who are trying and passionate to try to get the word out and the truth out about what we're really up against, because there are many of us. There are so much more many of us. That's why they're trying to kill us. So as long as we're empowered with the information, we can resist. On that note, Dane, I'll come back to you. I wanted to talk about that, but you said you've been at this for 20 years. What kinds of resistance have you faced? Persecution? How are you still alive when you're here speaking the truth?
Well, certainly those in power are free to do whatever they want to whoever they want. We know that. If they can take out, for those that have seen JFK's final speech and the line he drew in the sand with the power structure, and he lived about a week after that, they can do whatever they want. In our particular case, the only threat or thing in that nature I've had on the way home at 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday night on the way home from a large presentation I gave in Northern California, I got a call from a high-level EPA official that wanted to know why I was still banging this drum. And I made it clear I'll never stop. Don't bother. And again, I can't not do this. I can't face my children and not do this. I can't face myself in the mirror. I've never been a part of the system. And perhaps that's a part of the equation. I don't know. I've never given my oath to the system in any way, shape, or form. So I can't know what their protocols are and how they operate. I do know from my friendships with high-ranking U.S. military officers, General Albert Stubblebine, highest-ranking U.S. military officer to speak out about what really happened on 9/11, that I was told we do have friends behind the curtain also that want this exposed, that realize it's a death sentence for everyone. On the current course, no one gets out alive. Those in power can crawl into their deep underground bunkers. Mark Zuckerberg can crawl into his $100 million Hawaiian underground bunker. They won't live that long on the current course. It's that bad. We have to change course. So certainly we hope and believe we have allies and friends behind the curtain as well that understand this will take everyone down. But whatever the case, there's no place to hide, no place on the Titanic. And people who are cowering in the shadows because they don't want to be separated from the herd, they don't want to be ostracized from friends and family for telling the truth. Now is the time when we decide what we're made of and why we're here. Why are we here? And again, we're all passengers on the planetary Titanic. Why hide in your cabin? Get on deck, help to sound the alarm, and perhaps we can change course enough to buy time at minimum. Is that not worth fighting for?
What's fascinating to me is my mother is a very, very smart woman, and she was ahead of the curve on all of this stuff. I mean, and she knew just by looking up at the skies something's not right,
Yes.
which you would think most people would be able to put two and two together. But she was ahead of the curve on this. So when I've been in, we'll say, traditional news media for more than 20 years. And so I've been a news anchor and in many newsrooms. And my mother would always be like, ask your meteorologist like about these chemtrails. And I'm like, okay, I will. And so I would. And it's just, they all would give me like the same line. Oh, well, no, that's silly. Like it's just condensation. Like, I mean, they would just always, every single one of them, just blow it off. And it was very frustrating because I do have respect for meteorologists. They have to get a whole nother degree to be on TV news, if you will, and to look at things and observe. And it's a science in itself. So how can they be so blind to that? What we're seeing in the skies isn't natural. What we're seeing in the skies has not always been there. I mean, you look at pictures, old pictures, you don't see what you see in the skies now. So how can they be so blind?
These are great questions. And should we call it a degree or a certificate of indoctrination from a power structure controlled institution?
Right.
And that's exactly what it is. So whether these people believe their denial or not is irrelevant. When we have the whole medical industry, the entire medical industry with almost no exceptions, still pretending that their concoction of injections are, quote, safe and effective, that's an exact parallel to the, quote, meteorological community denying what we have film footage of. What I ask people listening to do is don't believe me, certainly don't believe the power structure program meteorologist. Believe what you see with your own eyesight and your own sense of reason. We have film footage of these aircraft, nozzles visible, turning dispersions on and off. End of debate. This is not, quote, condensation. And further, all military tankers and all commercial aircraft are fitted with what's known as a high bypass turbofan jet engine. That's a jet-powered fan. 90% of the air that moves through that engine is not combusted. By design, it's nearly incapable of making any condensation trail except under rare and extreme circumstances. Do we see, if we watch a documentary about some Arctic researcher and their breath is condensing, do we see a cloud start to form over their head that lingers and spreads out? And or a vehicle, if you live in a cold region and your vehicle is emitting condensation in the morning and you're letting it warm up in your driveway, does a cloud start to form over your house? Really? This is particulate matter. These are sprayed particulate dispersions, period. And again, not guessing. GeoEngineeringWatch.org spent over $100,000 taking a NOAA flying lab to altitude, all on film, all on the record, all in our groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, with over 26 million views on it now on YouTube, in spite of censorship. And we proved that these heavy aircraft are emitting climate engineering elements starting with aluminum. And in that film, there's also 2 U.S. Air Force generals acknowledging these programs. Former Canadian Minister of Defense acknowledging these programs, former government officials, former government scientists. We're asking people to actually investigate and not to tell themselves that if they ignore this issue long enough, if they tell themselves it isn't so, it'll magically go away. That's not going to happen.
So moving on to another topic. We've had a lot of extreme events. We've talked about hurricanes. We've talked about the flooding that just happened. What about these wildfire fires? I covered what happened in Maui and in Hawaii and the many. I was actually in California, living there, being a news anchor there in California when we had some wildfires then. You hear all kinds of theories, though, when it comes to wildfires. How is this related to weather control or weather manipulation? You know, because you also hear people saying that there's lasers that start these wildfires. So can you tell me the correlation of how these can be related to weather manipulation as well?
Another great question. In the case of the wildfires, they are most completely connected to climate engineering more than any other factor by far. And this is where the so-called environmental community is in criminal denial as well. because on a warming planet, the planet is warming. It's in total meltdown. Climate engineering is making it worse, not better. And I'm no Al Gore fan. I'm no fan of any environmental group. They're all behaving with criminal hypocrisy. None of them will address the climate engineering issue because they want to protect their 501c3 nonprofit. And we know that because GeoEngineeringWatch.org attorneys spoke to attorneys from every major environmental group, WWF, Sierra Club, Greenpeace, all the rest. They won't address this issue because they don't want to lose their nonprofit status. That is criminal hypocrisy. So I'm no fan of any of them. But the planet is in total meltdown. Climate engineering is making it worse overall, not better. So the atmosphere holds 7% more moisture for every degree C of warming. We're likely past 3.5 C from baseline right now. It must rain much, much more overall on a warming planet. And it's not. We have much more protracted drought than we have Texas deluge. There's a factor we're not being told about. That factor is climate engineering, and they can and they are cutting off precipitation intentionally. We can, again, speculate on the agendas and objectives, but they are cutting off precipitation to places like Lahaina, for example, which was declared a, quote, flash drought zone 1 week before it was incinerated. The climate engineers, by manipulation of atmospheric pressure zones, can and are, this is through frequency transmissions like HARP in Alaska, ionosphere heater, and other mobile units. We have sea-based X-band radar. They can create surface wind flows, zonal wind flows, which we see all the time now. Hurricane force straight line winds, like they did to Lahaina, like they did to the Palisades, which is basically blowtorching those regions after they've dried them out. The Palisades didn't have rain for about 8 months before that happened. So the source of ignition and all the claims made there, that's a separate subject completely. And those that start throwing the laser bit around don't know anything about laser physics. Are there military weapons that could start a fire from an airborne platform? Yes. Can they do the rest of what's being claimed? No. Laser anything doesn't work with any particulate matter in the air, whether it's smoke, clouds, or anything else. And all these claims are patently false. The ground-based unit that it would take to do anything even remotely close to that weighs 1.8 million pounds. It would take 18 semi-trucks to move it. That's not flying around. So when people bring up that narrative, they're obscuring and discrediting the issue of climate engineering, which is the foundational factor that is setting the template for these fires to burn with such ferocity. To add to this, Christy, at geoengineeringwatch.org, we found in military archives and posted a U.S. military document titled Forest Fires as a Military Weapon, or Wildfires as a Military Weapon. In that document, 140 pages long, it describes specifically cutting off the precipitation with climate intervention operations to prepare an area to burn with maximum ferocity. And within that document, it names 17 sites for study zones inside the U.S. borders, including L.A. Is that not alarming? Is that not alarming as hell? For people that think that those in power are here to protect them and their posterity, please wake up. That's not the case. And we have, again, documented proof of satellite imagery of these aircraft cutting off precipitation specifically to the U.S. West Coast. One of my presentations from 11, 12 years ago, engineered drought catastrophe target California. That is exactly correct data today. I've had personal meetings in the Capitol with Governor Newsom and his top aide, presented data to them, which they didn't refute. And yet, what has Gavin done? Nothing. He's a tool for the power structure. That's all he is. That's all of these people are at this level. They're going to do what they're told to do, period, while the rest of us bear the consequences.
So obviously this is a hard question to answer, but who are these people? I mean, how many people do you think know what they're doing? Like those that are behind the controls, that are working what you've described. Do you think that there are a lot of people that are just following orders that maybe don't know what they're doing?
Yes.
How big of a group of people are there, do you think, that are making these life-changing decisions?
You're completely correct. Completely correct. Another excellent question. The vast, vast majority are compartmentalized and convinced that whatever part in the play they're carrying out, it's somehow for the greater good. We know this from the Milgram experiments. For those who don't know what those are, very shocking experiments with humans, people that were told by someone they thought it was in authority to administer a lethal shock to another human being, which they didn't really carry out. This was it wasn't a real shock, but they thought it was. What that proved was that 90% of the human race will do whatever they're told, even to an innocent human being, if they believe they're being told by someone in authority to do so. So yes, it's completely compartmentalized. Let's take the spraying of Agent Orange in Vietnam. Was the pilot of the plane spraying Agent Orange told, hey, this is going to kill your pal on the ground? Of course not. Of course he wasn't told that. So again, we have too many people too willing to blindly follow whatever order they're given. And at the very top of this pyramid of insanity, who's at the very top? Who are they? Who are the they I'm referring to? It's those who
it's
print
a big
the money.
question, Dane. That's why I was like, how do I even ask this? It's like,
but it's a great question.
It always comes back to that, doesn't it? It always comes back to who are they?
Correct. And I'll follow that up with why would they do this to themselves? So as far as who are they are those who print the money. Those who control the flow of money control everything. They control militaries, thus they control countries. They control elected puppets like Ted Cruz. They control institutions, which they fund or don't fund. As we just saw, anybody who protests certain things they don't want them to protest, universities included, their funding is cut off immediately. Those who print the money control it all. The political theater is exactly that. It's a theater. And as far as those, and many people, and Christy, you've probably heard there's people that walk away from this issue because they simply say they wouldn't do this to themselves. You must have heard that before, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I've heard that.
Let's examine that question. What have they done to themselves already? The detonation of 2,400 nuclear bombs on planet Earth, which has contaminated virtually everything on this planet. Don't they know they work after a couple dozen? 2,400 plus nuclear bombs, and we're building a lot more right now. Let's take Fukushima. Triple nuclear meltdown, no technology to fix it, no end in sight. Many people think Fukushima is all better. Couldn't be further from the truth. So that by itself is an existential threat if other factors don't do the job first, which I would argue in the current course will be the case. So let's plug that into geoengineering again. Climate engineering is destroying the protective layers of the atmosphere, starting with the ozone layer. Now we're much more susceptible to a coronal mass ejection or a solar flare. If we get a big event like the Carrington event in the 1800s, that will shut down grids around the globe. That will shut down the ability of nuclear power plants to cool themselves. Now we're going to have Fukushima times 100, 200. We have 442 nuke plants around the globe now. So we're going to have hundreds of Fukushimas. Game over. Climate engineering connected to that as well. And we're building 60 more nuke plants right now. Why would they do this to themselves? Why would they build more nuclear bombs when we have enough to exterminate humanity thousands of times over right now? We're not dealing with sanity. Those in power are not sane. They are power addicts. And we know from psychoanalysis, specifically of those in power, there's a common thread. This is right from the manual. A, quote, near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. Does an addict care the next fix might kill them? They don't care. So for those who try to convince themselves that they wouldn't do this to themselves, they already have.
Yeah, we're, like you said, we're not dealing with sane people. Are you encouraged, though, that there is now more acceptance to the point that a congresswoman would introduce legislation to make it a felony to have weather manipulation, whether or not that legislation could be effective, but to the point that, you know, someone in government would acknowledge that this is not a conspiracy, that the governor of Florida would acknowledge that, no, this is not a conspiracy. Is that encouraging to you? Do you feel like we're on a path to finally raising awareness and hopefully doing something about this?
Very encouraging. Another great question. It's very important. When I started this journey over 20 years ago, I only heard my own voice coming back at me. No one listened to anything I said, no matter how much data I had, no matter how much testing proof I bared. No one listened. And now there's legislation wheels turning in about 36 states right now. We deal with legislators all the time now on this issue, becoming very hard for those in power to hide what's happening. Nice. A lot more leaks in the dam are starting to develop that they don't have enough fingers and toes to plug. Here's the danger we face now. as those in power realize they're at a point where this is about to be exposed, again, every person on the planet knowing what their governments have done to them without their knowledge or their consent, what cards will they play then? And what we've said at geoengineeringwatch.org for 16 years of our existence and that organization, that once the biosphere collapse beats the power structure to the intersection, once the population begins to wake up to what's been done to them, they'll play big cards, false flag events, pathogen release, and global conflict. They're not going to go peacefully into the night. They're not. They have big cards and they will play them. So what's in our rain right now besides the toxic heavy metals I named? We also have polymer fibers and graphene. That's in our rain. And not only are those elements toxic, they're used militarily for what's called a biological carrier platform. That means to carry a pathogen from the clouds to the ground. We have the world's second most recognized climate engineer, Dr. Ken Caldera, former Department of Defense scientist. We own an audio of him stating in his own words what he did for the US DoD was to design methods of spraying pathogens into clouds to infect the populations below. What do we have with CV-19? We had 85 countries infected in 3 days. That's indicative of airborne dispersion. We have Italian scientists that identified CV-19 attached to airborne particulates. Do not all these dots connect completely? So if those in power know they're about to lose that power or the public's about to reach the proverbial pitchforks and torches moment, what's to stop them from using what's already in this spray mix in our skies, these biological carrier platforms, and adding something like Marburg or Ebola, which would level the playing field overnight, 90% mortality rates with those pathogens. So why would we think they wouldn't do this? We have hundreds of biolabs around the globe experimenting with these exact pathogens. And we have the Washington Post, Christy, stating as far back as 1977, even that far back, Washington Post on the record, the U.S. military had, as of that date, conducted no less than 239 open-air biological tests on innocent, unknowing U.S. civilians. How many tests have they done since then?
Wow. Yeah, it's just so much. And, and they always say at the beginning of every show that, but with solutions and hope. And so we're kind of on a negative. I mean, it's important for us to understand.
Let's go there.
We need to be empowered with information, but
yes.
What can you leave us with? That's
got to deliver
and
the
hope,
bad news first. Now here's the end of the equation that makes us all understand how important we are in this equation. And this is the end. This is the end epilogue of the Dimming documentary. That any one of us could be the final grain of sand to trigger the landslide of awakening. If we can reach that point, we will take a quantum leap in the right direction. And any one of us could be that final grain of sand. If you share credible data from a credible source, don't just run out in the street and point at the sky and start ranting. We're playing chess. We need to learn how to play well. So if one person shared credible data with two people at the beginning of a 30-day month, and those two each the second day, and that continues for 30 days, you end up with millions of people. Literally, my math is not wrong. So again, people grossly underestimate their personal power. Those in power aren't gods, and we're not helpless. And if we push this issue to the full light of day, the fur will fly. And how do we actually stop these operations? When we push this, again, to a critical mass point, and those participating and their families, military families, defense contractor families, when they realize that they're literally participating in their own near-term demise, one would hope there's enough sense of reason and moral fortitude left to stand down and stop participating. And that is the way forward. And all of us are desperately needed to help in that battle. And once you start to wake people up around you, you don't feel helpless anymore. And you start to build a support system around yourself. And we try to help that at geoengineeringwatch.org. We supply very high quality printed materials. There's no politics, no advertising. It's only this issue. We're all in this for the fight only. And if you, for example, or you can share links for free from the homepage, The Dimming, which we made available for free in spite of what we spent on that film. We made it available for free the day we were done. You share credible data and you wake people up around you. And even that by itself, Christy, when you know you had a hand in waking someone up to actually seeing the wider horizon clearly and raising their consciousness, that by itself matters in ways I would argue we can't know or understand. But if enough people wake up, And we can stop these programs from the inside out. We'll have taken a quantum leap in the right direction. We'll allow the planet to respond on its own to the damage done, and that will at minimum buy us time to focus on the rest, and that's worth fighting for.
Yes, absolutely. That is a great way to end the topic. Dane Whittington, Wingington. Gosh, sorry about that. Thank you so much for your expertise and for that encouragement at the end. And we want to follow up with you and make sure that we're apprised and helping get that word out. So thank you so much. I encourage people to go to geoengineering.org and watch the links there. You can donate, support the work there, because it is all about waking people up. So thank you so much, Dane.
Thank you, Christy. It's actually geoengineeringwatch.org. I just want to make sure that clear so that they don't end up at a different site.
Geoengineeringwatch.org.
And the same gratitude to you, to the Lindell channel. It's voices like yours that help us get the word out. This is a team effort. Again, all of us spokes in the wheel, all of us necessary to make it roll. So it's a team effort. Very grateful to you, to your followers, and we will continue to do our part on this end.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dane. So again, geoengineeringwatch.org, and support his work. Thank you so much for watching Get Free with Christy Lee, and I'll see you next time.